pesos for a warrior's scalp, 50 for a woman's, and 25 for a child's. Not surprisingly, they mistrusted all attempts at a truce with the government, preferring to keep on the run, relying on their traditional skills. The soldiers pursuing them were baffled by their ability to disappear into this barren landscape, which they found so unforgiving. If you know what you're doing, you need never be without fire in this desert. This plant here is called sotol, and this dry flowering stem makes an excellent hand-drill fire lighting set. A good tip when you're travelling in these parts is always to carry gloves, because most of these desert plants are covered in thorns for protection. The wood's really light, but it's also strong. And that is why the Apache also used it for another job. They took the tip of a cavalry sabre, lashed it in the end, and made a lance for fighting with. Whenever they gathered materials like this, they'd also collect up the seeds and scatter them widely to make sure that whenever they came back here, they'd have resources. Sotol is one of the easiest woods that you can use for friction firelighting. Once you've mastered the technique, you need never carry matches here. What I've done is I've drilled in a hole here, the same diameter as the end of the drill. Now what I've got to do is cut a notch into this, and that's critical because in that notch a small powder is going to collect that gives us the ember with which I'll light my fire. Once it's prepared, it only takes a few seconds to make fire. Well, this is it then, night time, the perfect time to travel in the desert in terms of temperature, although it's still warm enough that I only need a shirt. Got to be careful though, because this time of night is when the rattlesnakes are most active. So I've got my stick just to give me any forewarning, and I'm going to keep my eyes peeled and keep a torch handy. Of course, moving at night was the way the Apache stayed ahead of their enemies, and they were able to cover great distances under the cover of darkness, and that's exactly what I'm going to try to do myself. I'd arranged to rendezvous with the crew at dawn, but I was an hour or so late. It was a really hard 20-mile hike, but the Apache would have left me way behind and been well hidden in the hills by now. Their relentless endurance must have been incredible. There are even accounts of them outpacing the cavalry. Hi guys.
Good hand.
Got any water?
Get that.
Great. Didn't quite make it. That is a long way.
What about the scent there?
You're not kidding.
See any snakes?
A couple. I need that. How's your hotel? I'm about halfway through the journey now, in a very well-hidden canyon that we know for sure was used by the Apache. In fact, the poles from their shelters survived here into the 1920s. Back there behind me, that's Sulphur Springs Valley. That's where I've crossed. And this is where I'm going to set up a fixed camp, because just as the Apache found, there's all the resources here I need to do it. It's a really well-hidden little canyon, but there's one problem. It's so dry, I think I'm going to have real trouble finding water. A 100 years ago, there'd have been water in the creeks hereabouts, but today the water level's dropped, so I'm having to resort to this technique to try and get a drink. I'm making a solar still, and basically what I've got in here is a billy can in this deep hole, and I'm filling the hole with soft pulpy cactus, prickly pear, and I'm going to put polythene over the top and try to condense moisture out of it. This tube acts as a straw to suck up any water that collects in my billy can. The stick stops dirt and insects from getting in. The plastic has to be well sealed round the edges, and then a stone weighs it down so that the condensed water drips into the can below. It's a long while since this riverbed saw any water, but it's worth exploring it, because further up it's quite likely I'm going to find some pockets of water just trapped there in the shade. You've got to persevere. An hour's searching, and there it is. That's great, more water. Of course, the other way, cleaning water up from rivers, is the old way, by boiling, and that's the joy of a fixed camp. Mind you, when you're in deserts, the last thing you want to be doing is boiling your water more than necessary, because obviously you're losing your water to steam. So two tips. One, have a lid on your cooking pot to reduce steam coming off. And the other is only bring your water to a rolling boil. That's all you need to do to make it safe. The Apaches used this area for camps because they could find everything they needed here. This is bear grass, used for thatching shelters. Yucca for string and food. Prickly pear cactus. The pads and fruit can be cooked and eaten. Agave that gave me that instant needle and thread was also a staple food. The base of the leaves is packed with carbohydrate, but is poisonous raw, as is the flowering spike, which I'll cook later. But first a use for the yucca, which I learned from a Chiricahua Apache. These are the leaves from the soap tree yucca, and I can use these to make a very simple cord. The first thing is to blunt off that nasty sharp spike there, and at this end, where it's really hard, I need to soften that first. To make the cord good and long, we take a couple of these strands and tie them at the end with a reef knot. But there we go. That's just 3 leaves. That's given me 3, 4, about 5 meters of cord. Really quick and simple. The yucca root also has a use. As you can see, starting to froth up, because in this plant you've got a natural form of soap, and it's that the Apache used on an almost daily basis to wash themselves and their hair. As the Apache roamed this area, they built temporary shelters called wickiups, which in later years they covered